I told my entitled parents that they don't deserve to have any more kids. I was born when my parents were very young, like my mother was 16 and my father was 17. Both families decided it would be the best for me if effectively my maternal grandparents raised me and my bio parents got to live their lives. That is not to say I didn't know who my actual parents were. This is not one of those situations like in movies where the mother pretends the daughter's child is actually her own. I and everyone knew who my progenitors were. My father moved away when he was 18, but my mother remained in my grandparents' house until she was 23 and I was around 7, but that doesn't mean we were close. She always treated me more like an annoying little brother rather than a son. She didn't like spending time with me, never attended any of my school functions or showed interest in my academic work or took me to do any fun activities. Whenever I was talking about my day, she would roll her eyes or change the topic to shut me up. When she moved out, I barely saw her. She just came to family gatherings and said an awkward hi and not even look at me. It hurt even if by that point I already considered my grandparents to be more my parents than her. My father was still living away, they weren't together at this point, but would come once or twice a year to visit his own family around the holidays and always made it a point to visit me and take me to do some sort of fun activities like going to the cinema or my favorite restaurant, things like that. But to me he was more like an estranged man than a dad, because when I compared him to my friends' fathers who picked them up from school every day and went to their games and played with them on the weekends, I didn't understand why this man who I saw maybe twice a year was supposed to be the same. Anyway, fast forward to a year ago. My father moved back to the same city where we live. He tried to hang out with me more often, but I wasn't really interested, although sometimes I complied. I don't hate him, I just don't know him. I even had a bedroom in his apartment, which is cool because he lives in the center of the city. Behind everyone's back, both my parents had started hang out, and a couple months later they announced they were dating. It was a shock. They asked me to move in with them to my father's apartment, which I refused, but they argued that we could finally be a family. I was about to start an argument on them when my grandma just said that changing school districts would be very inconvenient and I could lose all my friends, and the situation de-escalated by itself, although my parents didn't let go of the idea. My parents asked for me to spend more time with them, and this was particularly frustrating because even though I never had any particular tension with my father, I most definitely do with my mother. I don't like being around her and she's treated me poorly my whole life, and I feel like she's now only trying to save face because she knows my dad wants me there. Now onto the issue. Last week they both came into my grandparents' house. They announced they were going to buy a house nearby in the neighborhood so that I can finally move in with them. I immediately said no, and when they said that changing schools would no longer be an issue, I found myself in a corner and I said that was never the problem and that I just simply don't see them as my parents and don't want to live with them. That's when they dropped the bomb on us. Not only they wanted me to move in with them so we could be a family, but my mother was pregnant, so we were going to be a bigger family even. I was shocked and I blew my lid on them. I told them they were the worst parents in the world and that they abandoned me for 16 and now they were going to bring another child into the world and do the same to them. And they never apologized for treating me like garbage and like a mistake they made and making me feel like I wasn't supposed to exist and dumping me to be other people's responsibility, and only now that they feel like they care they want to be my family. My mother screamed back at me, telling me I was a brat and that she wasn't going to make the same mistakes twice raising her second baby, and I told her she never raised me to begin with, and my father said that they were young and trying to do the best they could. Well, guess what? The best you could was pretty effing bad. I stormed out and went to my sobbing. I've been very depressed for the last week. They have both called and texted since, but I ignored them. My grandparents agree with me that I shouldn't move and that my parents shouldn't expect me to be all loving and forgiving after how they've treated me. However, they believe they are starting a new chapter of their lives now that they are more mature and stable, which I guess leaves me behind. I've also had time to think that I'm the same age my mother was when she had me, and what a huge responsibility that must have been. However, I still can't forgive them. I told my entitled parents that they don't deserve to have any more kids. My parents had me when they were very young, 16F, 17 male, they got separated and left me to be raised by my maternal grandparents. My mother was around but couldn't care less about me, but my dad went away and we had very rare but positive contact. Now he's come back, they're back together, they're having a new baby and want me back into their lives. I refused and told them they're horrible and shouldn't have kids, which brings us to the now. After that I started trying to collect my thoughts and arranging a meeting with my father to discuss the things that were bothering me. Why did he abandon me? Why did he think he could just reappear into my life like that? That I wasn't going to move in with them and I didn't consider them my parents because they never acted as such, etc. We met at a park and he went to hug me, but I stepped away and he looked hurt and he just apologized for what happened the other day and went into this speech about how we could try to transition into living together part-time and respect my boundaries, and I went blank. I didn't expect for him to talk, so I pulled out my phone and just showed him the post I made the other day and he started reading it in silence. After a while he read it all and some responses and he just asked me if this was true and I said yes, and he asked me if I had questions he would answer honestly. I asked what happened when I was born and he told me that when my mother got pregnant all options were laid on the table: abortion, adoption, marriage, Gramps taking care of me, only one of my parents taking me in. My mother was deadly scared of abortion, because some religious group had told them some horror story about dead babies and mothers being killers or some bullshit like that, so she wanted to give me up for adoption, but my father refused. He couldn't bear the idea of having his child living somewhere and never seeing him again, so he proposed to taking me in as sole caretaker and leaving his college plans to stay in our city, but his parents weren't thrilled with this plan and pushed him to go to college so that he could provide economically for me. They offered themselves to take care of me, but they were significantly older than my maternal grandparents. She was an only child and, at the time, they were just 40, whereas my father has 5 older siblings and his parents were already in their 60s. And since taking care of me meant taking care of my mother for a while as well, my maternal grandparents decided it was the best decision for them to take me. Also, intermediately after I was born, My mother had postnatal depression and the doctors advised them to not completely remove them from her side or more damage to our relationship could be done, and my grandparents wanted her to eventually love me as a son. One thing to note about my father is that even when he was in college he worked part-time to pay child support, and once he started working in a law firm he started sending more money to my grandparents and set up a college fund for me, which was news for me. My grandparents don't know about this but my mother does, so I don't know what to do with this information. My father thought of me all the time he spent away and believed he had left me with a happy family and that he was working to give me a better life, but I followed his life trough social media. He went to parties, vacations, had girlfriends and did lots of fun stuff and barely had any contact with me. I asked him why couldn't have he made more of an effort to be a part of my life? Like, I understand if he needed to study in another city and work there, but it's no effort to call or text. Coming once a year just doesn't cut it. He looked ashamed and apologized to me, and I took advice that I saw in a lot of the comments here that I would forgive but not forget, and that maybe we can build a relationship going forward, but it will always be marked by his actions in the past. If he hasn't been my dad for 16 years, he can't start now. He seemed sad but accepted my conditions. I then told him about my concerns about my mother, told him how bad he treated me as a child, that I did not think she would be a good mother for my sibling, and that I wanted to go low/no contact with her. He said that after he left for college and they broke up he would call her once in a while to check up on things, but that quickly ended, and when he came back she explained to him that her and I had a great bond, and, even though we didn't see each other daily, it was because I was in those teenage years and that she loved spending time with me and had been a very hands-on mom. I told him that all that she said was a lie and that she never cared for me, like when she would ask my grandparents babysitting money for taking care of me, or that she would call me annoying or disgusting to my face when we still lived together, and that severely messed me up. He was very serious and said he would talk to her, but that he really would not allow a child to be treated like that, and that he was sorry for letting that happen to me. Lastly, he told me I would have a bedroom in his house, but he understood perfectly that I would never live there. He was quite emotional at this point and got chalked up at this point when he asked me if, even if I didn't consider him my father, I would consider his baby my sibling. I said of course, and that I planned to be a very active part in their life if I could. He started crying and asked if he could hug me, and this time I agreed. I am happy about the resolution of our conversation, and I really do believe he will be a good parent for my sibling. But what my mom barged in to say next would reveal the truth about this awful situation. I will never forget what she did. I told my entitled parents that they don't deserve to have any more kids. So, a lot of you warned me about the shit hitting the fan, sort to speak, when my bio mother talked with my dad, and today that's exactly what happened. My father sent me a text early in the morning warning me about the fact that he was going to confront my mother and that he didn't want anything to splash to me, and reassured me that he believed me completely, and I braced myself because I expected for her to call me berating me or something. I truly don't care about what she thinks, but these past few days have been emotional draining and I wasn't sure if I was ready for another full-blown out confrontation. After a few hours my mother pulled into our house and let herself in, screaming like mad and calling me every name in the book, saying I had ruined her relationship and asking me why had I been blabbing about private matters that don't concern anybody. I said that my childhood matters to me and my father, who is also going to be the future father of her child, and that her actions ruined her relationship. She called me a useless piece of trash and said I was the biggest effing mistake she's ever done in her life. I didn't know she could still hurt me, but that was a low blow, and I said that I would do anything in my power to take her baby away from her because she was a monster of a mother. We were screaming at this point, and my grandparents, who were in the backyard, must have heard us, and entered the room and separated us and heard part of the fight. I was fighting tears and my grandma walked me upstairs to my room as my grandpa screamed to my mother how dared speak to me that way. My grandma soothed me a little and then went to confront my mother with my grandpa. I heard from the door how they ripped my mother a new one. They confronted her for telling me the things that she did, for treating me like garbage all my life, and for lying to my father. They told her how disappointed they were in her for always treating me with disgust, and how many excuses they made for her, thinking she was a child trying to raise a child, but she was now an adult and her behavior continued the same, and they said they were on the path of disinheriting her. My mother was screaming about how hard it had been for her and how much she hurt, but my grandparents were having none of that. They raised me and she was allowed to have the life she wanted and to take all the decisions she wanted without repercussions ever, and I even heard them say that if there was any custody battle ensued over the baby to come, they would take the father's side unless she radically changed everything about her behavior. They went outside for a while, so I don't know what they said, but eventually, they came into my room and my grandparents looked extremely serious and my mother was red and crying and apologized to me through gritted teeth. I didn't respond, but my grandparents said on her behalf that she was going to start therapy immediately and she was no longer welcome in the house. I called my father after the debacle and he was furious. He talked to my mother before going to a work meeting thing or something, and he confronted her about everything. Apparently it was nasty, but he was willing to work on the relationship for the good of the baby on the condition that my mother would also be working on improving her relationship with me so that whenever I visited them I wouldn't feel uncomfortable. After he left he made her promise she wouldn't contact me until they talked again, but there's my mother for you folks. I asked him to think on what's better for himself and for the baby and to not hold today against my mother if he doesn't want to. I can't wait to have a sibling and love them and always be there for them and show them what a family is. I want to be that person they can always rely on for them, and I want to feel that bond with someone, so even if I have my misgivings about my parents, and I do, a lot, I do not about being a big brother. Edit, the baby was born and it's been a great time. Bite, my mother ran away for the first 3 months of his life, and I had to act as a babysitter while my dad worked. Now she is back and blaming for raising him wrong.